All right, hello, it's Jabria Jabbers, and we're going to be doing a fairly quick review of Grady Hendrix' How to Sell a Haunted House. The reason we'll be doing this review quickly is because I am resting because I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, but I wanted to do this before I start reading another book and then forget this one. So starting off, if you're new here to Jabria Jabbers, I have read Grady Hendrix twice before this. I read the Survival Final Girl Support Group, and I also read A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and now this is How to Sell Your House. So I will say that this is my least favorite of the three that I've read. This book was very hard to get into. I had to really push myself to keep reading this book. I think it was just because the main character is not very likable. So to give you the gist or the plot of this book, there's this woman and her name is Louise and her nickname is Lulu, and she's, I think, in her early 40s or either late 30s, and she has a daughter, and her daughter's 5, and she's a single parent, and she lives far away from her family. And one day she gets a call from her brother telling her that her parents have died in a car accident, and so she needs to return to her hometown to get everything settled. And as you can see, she ends up realizing that the house that her parents lived in, her childhood home, is now haunted. And it's specifically, and it's going to be spoilers now, spoilers. It's specifically haunted by puppets that her mother was obsessed with and kind of used in terms of her career when she was younger. And so just to get into the character and why I felt like it was so hard to continue reading this book, is the main character, Louise, she's an unreliable narrator in terms of she views things from a very different personal perspective. Of course, everybody has their own perspective on what happened, but she leaves out a lot of stuff. And I also just feel like she's just not very likable. In my opinion, she would be not a very good mom, but not in a typical kind of way of not being a good mom. It is kind of realistic. I feel like the way that she parents is pretty realistic, but it is very immature, and I feel like you can tell that the mother, Louise, has a lot of stuff to work on before she should have been allowed to have another human being that she was completely responsible for. I also feel like they didn't give the daughter, her name is Poppy, the 5-year-old kid, I think she's 5, they didn't really give her a lot of personality, in my opinion. Grady, in terms of the little girl's character, she was just a very generic 5-year-old. She didn't have anything specific or interesting that stood out about her. And I feel the same thing about Louise. The character that I found most interesting in this book was actually her brother, Mark. I really didn't like him either in the beginning, but I liked the fact that his character was interesting. He had interesting things to say, and he was very notable. He was very memorable and intriguing, in order to use a different word than interesting. I would say it took about genuinely halfway through the book, if not 1/3 through the book, before I finally was able to stop forcing myself to read it and easily read it. And this was the section that was told from the perspective of Mark, completely from the perspective of Mark. I believe he had 2 chapters to himself, which I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed that there was a switch in perspective in the writing, but it wasn't like Mark's chapters, it wasn't said in a very grand way. It was just he was I'm gonna tell you what happened, and then it just switched to his perspective, which was first person. I really liked that. I really enjoyed the details of Mark, and the writing was so good. And I'm gonna say one of my favorite quotes I got from Mark's chapters on page 237 in this book. He said, with his face blown up to life size, Pumpkin looked wilder, more dangerous, more like a hand grenade with the pin pulled. I think it's time, Clark said, that we got serious about our work. And there was another thing that I really liked about So there was another thing that I liked about kind of the greater meaning, the greater metaphorical meaning behind the puppets was this quote said by Clark. Clark is a friend of Mark, by the way. A puppet is a possession that possesses the possessor. And I'll say that again. A puppet is a possession that possesses the possessor. And I really like this. I feel like this book had a lot of themes surrounding society and how objects and materialism have these very negative effects and how they carry energy specifically because we allow them to. So I really liked Mark's chapters. What I also didn't like about like the cover is that this is not how the house looks at all. I believe they describe the house as a flat brick one story that's like the oldest in the neighborhood and looks like the trashiest. And this house does not look trashy. And it's also not made of bricks. And it's also not one story. So I don't know why this house is on all of the books. That's not the house from the story at all. I don't know, maybe there's a reason for this, but this is not how the house is described in the story at all. I did like the twist that came at the end of the book, because the whole time they thought that the puppet was a demon and it was some type of demonic presence in the puppet that was haunting them, but it wasn't. It was something else, which I'll not mention even though this is a spoiler section. And also I didn't like how at the end, when it was kind of like resolved, when she had finished what needed to be done, the puppet returned. I didn't like that. I felt like everything after that was unnecessary, especially because this book was difficult for me to keep pushing forward. I feel like the writing from the perspective of the Louise character was very much from her perspective, and I just don't like her. I don't like the way that she thinks. I feel like it's so wordy and it's overly like done. She repeats a lot of things. I'm like, you've already said that. I don't need it to be repeated again. And in terms of like the ending, I believe the ending switched to like a few months later. Yeah, a few months later. And they had renovated the house. I don't like that. I wish they wouldn't have renovated the house. I wish the house would have gotten like burned down. I feel like that would have been like more of a like moment. But I feel like because the house was just renovated, there's still a chance that like something more could happen. And I don't like that after so much repetition in terms of getting rid of this possessed puppet, there still was more. I didn't like that. I liked the continued pushing and Final Girl support group of like the plot and whodunit, but I didn't like it in this book. And I think it's because of the perspective and the writing from Louise's perspective. Something that I did appreciate, and what I've said before that I appreciate about Grady Hendrix, is that he doesn't just write the stories. He really gives you more. He makes it into this whole thing. And what he did with this book, he made these different sections in the book with the different stages of grief because the parents, they died. And so I'll give you an example. Bargaining. This is the chapter. This is where it starts with Mark's section. But the bargaining, loved all the little different like sections of the different stages of grief. I think I like that little extra touch. And then just like in his other book, he has like these very like contextualizing edits. So here he has the obituary of the parents that died, And not just the front cover. He has like details of the service and who was there, testimonials, musical interlude, recessional. And then he also has a kind of like flyer for the mom that was into puppets. The mom's name was Nancy. So like he has like an extra little bit of like what she does, what she did with the puppets, the different shows that she produced with the puppets. And so I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that about Grady Hendrix going like above and beyond in all his books and his writing. So in terms of the score, I would give this, the stars I would give this out of 5, 5 being the best, 1 being the worst. I would give this a 1.5 or a 2. Simply because I would not have finished reading this book if I didn't have this channel. I would not have continued reading this book. I would have stopped because it just wasn't intriguing. Like it wasn't easy for me to read, and it wasn't pulling and alluring enough for me to want to read this book in the first 10 chapters. For sure, at least the 10 chapters, I was like, it was a struggle to keep interest in this book. And like I said, the discrepancy with the imagery, I just really don't like false advertisement. Like it doesn't look like this at all. And I just didn't like that. And the points that I did get are mostly solely from Mark's chapter. And the 0.5 is probably for the creativity, because I've never read a story like this because I'm fairly new to the horror genre. Okay, that's all. Subscribe, leave a comment if you haven't already, like, thumbs up, share, and I'll see you next time.